Hi everybody, it's Kelly Christensen coming at you with another lecture for INTR 101. Now today we're going to talk about critical reading, which is something that I think a lot of people kind of shy away from or shrug off when they see it on the syllabus, just because it can be a little difficult to have a long conversation about how to read well. So we're not going to get into the pedantics of like actually reading, but we're going to talk about some tips as to how you can read your class assignments better and more effectively. So doing those assigned readings is important. I know when I was a first year student, I kind of shrugged them off. I didn't do them as often. But later I started to realize, no, they provide a lot of information for the class. They give you a lot of context about the material that you're learning. So it's really good to actually dive into those and read them. But it's important to know that there are ways that you can read them more effectively. So sometimes just trying to slug through that reading is really hard, and it can be better to read it out of order, or to skim, or to just chunk it up into different sections and read those with breaks in between so that you aren't going crazy trying to read them all at once. So we're going to talk about some tips, and then at the end of this lecture I'm going to show you a little bit more about the assignment that we have in conjunction with this lecture. So let's get started. And what I want you to think about is, what do you do when you're assigned a reading for class? So if you were like me, you would not do it, which is not a great thing. But later in my career, what I would do when I was assigned a reading for a class is quickly read like the abstract if it was a scientific reading, or sort of like a synopsis of it to get a general idea of what I needed to read. But then I would also always look at how many pages it was, right? Because like for super long readings, it would be like sort of, I don't want to say heartbreaking, but when I saw that it was like 17 pages long, there was some dread there. I was like, man, I really don't want to do this. So take a sec and think about what you do when you're assigned a reading for class. Think of what reaction you have to those readings, and realize that that's totally fine and totally valid. They may not be your favorite thing to do, and that's all right. But we're going to see if there are some ways that we can improve them, make them a little more fun, or at least a little more bearable. So first step to doing your reading is to embrace the reading. And what I mean by that is to think about, how does this actually help? And realize that the point of these readings is to acquire knowledge. They're there to help you develop an understanding of the material and to introduce you to new terms and ideas. And they also act as a way to gain more exposure to class material. So you can get ideas for major assignments and projects and critically think and process the information with more time. So sometimes readings are used as a way to get the information to you before lectures, so that you have some general knowledge before you go in. And those readings are really important, because how many of you have sat in class before? Obviously, I'm asking this to a YouTube video, so it's kind of weird. But have you sat in class before, heard some new information, some new ideas, some new knowledge, and been confused by it? Chances are yes. I know I was constantly. I would leave class being like, I don't even know what happened. But when I started doing readings before class, I started getting exposed to that material beforehand, so I had a general idea. Or I would do the readings after class to kind of rehash those ideas that I was just given and see if I could understand them better. And like this point says, it does give you ideas for new assignments and projects. So maybe you're in a class where you know you're going to have to write a big paper on some of the course material. Doing those readings is a really good way to get your kind of like creative juices going to figure out what that paper or project is going to be about. So when you're given a reading, you want to find and understand that purpose. So like I said, reading before class is a way to introduce ideas, concepts, formulas. It can ground the lecture, and it can give you the basics of the class lecture. So maybe your instructor doesn't have enough time to go into every single nitty-gritty detail about something, beforehand, and they want to use that reading as sort of a primer for you. So they want to give you some information first, that way in class you can dive a bit deeper. And reading after class is there to help clarify concepts and look for connections between lecture material. And what it really does is it helps reinforce class time. So maybe in your lecture, they sort of did the broad idea of what was going on. They gave you the big picture stuff. Your reading can help reinforce the big picture by giving you a lot of the details that maybe there wasn't time for. So before the reading, you want to actually preview the material and prepare some questions. So check out that preface or the introduction. It'll help you understand what the text is about. Look at the table of contents, the chapter summaries, and the section headings to give you a better idea. And try to develop some questions about the material, either general or specific. So maybe you've got, a book reading for, let's say, like a geology class. And you notice that the chapter is about identifying different types of minerals or different types of rocks. You can go through and read the intro about that, and then sort of read the section headings and form questions like, is there a scale that I use to identify different types of rocks? What are the main categories that they might fit into, right? So you're giving yourself some questions that you're going to try and find the answers for as you're reading that text. So then when you're actually reading, you want to read with focus and you want to engage with that text. So just sitting there reading it page by page and not really doing anything else isn't the most active way to engage. So as you're going through, you want to mark up that text. I think a lot of us have a fear of highlighting or writing in the margins or anything like that. And if you rented your books, yeah, that's going to be kind of difficult. But there are ways around that. So when you're marking it up, you're going to look for definitions, examples, and connections. You want to highlight and underline things that really stick out to you. So formulas, definitions, main ideas, and key concepts. Those are big things that you want to draw your attention to. If you're renting a book or you just don't want to highlight your book, use sticky notes. For each page that something is going on, have a little list of sticky notes, or like put one next to a section that has like, hey, remember this. And then take notes while you're reading. So that's a really good thing, especially when you have super dense material. So let's say it's really wordy. There's a lot of definitions, a lot of words that maybe you've never heard before, different key terms that are really new to you. It's a really good idea to take notes on those key terms, those ideas, if there's rules or formulas that you need throughout that, or people. Common people or dates that keep showing up. Writing those down as you read is really useful, because then let's say you're 3 pages later and they bring up something again, you don't have to flip back. You can just look at your notes and be like, oh, right, that was the thing that they were talking about. So here's an example of highlighting and underlining gone wrong. And I see this a lot. Students will highlight everything in a text. And when you highlight everything, you're really highlighting nothing. So keep in mind that highlighting, underlining, marking up that text is for critical information. So what's really good idea to do is to read a section first and then go back and highlight. So rather than highlighting as you go, you want to read a section, reflect on it, highlight just the couple of key things that actually are important, because then that helps you process the material as you go. So reading with focus also involves clarifying confusing material. So when you come across a section that doesn't really make sense, rather than just moving on and kind of saying, well, hopefully I'll figure it out later, reread it. Oftentimes things make a lot more sense with a second viewing. And it might be helpful to read it once, wait, give yourself a little break, try and like Google some terms for yourself, and then come back and reread it, because chances are it'll make a little more sense on that second reading. And make sure you're writing those questions down as you go, because some of them you might be able to find in a glossary or in the footnotes, or with a quick Google search, or asking a classmate or instructor or friend. So the point of this is to build a foundation of knowledge. And to build that foundation, you want to actually tackle the difficult content, tackle the confusing things. So rather than just passing along by them without fully knowing, going back, taking some time and clarifying those things. So one thing that can be really helpful is to develop a system for your own reading. So we talk about this in coaching, which is how do you mark up a text efficiently and in a way that's consistent. So here we have a bit of text about Charlemagne, and then we have a legend for what our different things mean. So for all of your writings, you might not have to actually draw out a specific symbol legend, but adding some of these things in to let you know when you're going back through these readings to know what everything is. So notice that they highlight things like key terms. They put stars around the thesis statement or the point of a paper, and they annotate it with information that was covered in class. So this might be a reading that was done after class, so then when they can go back and be like, oh yeah, right, we talked about Pope Leo III during this time, so I can remember that little bit of it. And that helps you recall that information and really contextualize it. So when you're developing this system, you want to think about what it is that you want to get out of the reading. And you want to keep the amount of symbols minimal, right? So if you fill your page with so much extra text, it's going to be really hard to navigate that. And you want to make sure that you're adjusting your system to what you're reading. So maybe in general, you talk about highlighting key terms, but for one of your classes, there's always a list of key terms sort of at the beginning of the chapter or at the end. And if that's the case, you don't necessarily need to highlight all of those terms later on in the text. So making sure that the system is adjustable for yourself is really important. And another thing to keep in mind is it's nice to keep this consistent. So if you decide that yellow highlights are how you're going to identify key terms, do that in all of your readings throughout all of your material. It helps your brain with pattern recognition and to just realize that like you have this consistent method of engaging with your material. So what do you do after the reading? It's really important to revisit the material. So we talked about taking notes as you go, and what's really useful is after the reading, write your own summaries, right? Try and write 3 to 5 sentences that summarize what your reading was. If it's a really long one, writing some more about it. Create some questions and try to answer them for yourself. So these questions can be as simple as like, what was the main idea of this article? Or what was the author trying to convey in this passage? What symbolism was used in this poem? What is the main formula for finding distance, right? So writing these questions for yourself helps you recall that material. And then reread important sections. So if there was something in class where you talked a lot about one specific thing and then there's a small section of it in the text, go back and reread that section since it was emphasized in class. And when you're reading sections, make sure you're looking where emphasis is placed. So bolded and italicized words are going to be important, right? They're set out that way to show that they are critical information. So going back over sections and looking for those things again will usually help you identify the key or main idea of that paper. And then rewrite your margin notes in a notebook. So if you are writing everything in the side, taking some time to translate those into a notebook onto a piece of paper, typing them in a Word doc, helps you review your ideas. Sometimes it helps to kind of expand those. So maybe you put a small note that was like, this relates to some other topic in the class. When you rewrite that note, actually fill in how that thing relates to the other thing. You also want to discuss the material. So connect with your professor or TA. Look for some questions that may have popped up or points of confusion. Sometimes authors just write in a way that doesn't make sense. I've read so many math books that were, quite frankly, terribly written. And no matter how many times I read a passage, it just didn't make sense. So I would circle it and I'd take it into my professor and be like, I know I should understand this, but like their wording just makes no sense. And usually the professor agreed and helped me kind of work out what it was that they were trying to say. So we talked about elevator pitches when it came to studying, and you can do that with your readings as well. So summarize the material to someone unfamiliar with the text. This is a really great idea for literature classes or scientific articles, really any type of reading that you want to get the main point across to someone. And then turn to your peers for added clarification. So utilizing drop-in tutoring and SI Pass, you can take those texts with you and say, hey, this came up, and I know we've kind of talked about it in class, but I'm still a little unsure. Can we discuss that reading? And when you attend things like drop-in tutoring and SI Pass, it's really great to have the readings done beforehand. That way you can be on page with everyone else who's there. And then you want to reread with some supplemental sources. So as you're reviewing those sections that are confusing, if you can't find the answer, in a glossary or in some other section of the book, turn to the internet. I love YouTube for all of the different educational videos that I can find. There are a lot of classes that there is no way I would have gotten through them if it hadn't been for YouTube. Just because sometimes it's so much more beneficial to hear that material in another way or to visualize it in a different way. So, you can find summaries or explanations of the text that you need to read. And then look for supplemental readings as well to clarify this. So maybe you're in one class and they mention like your required readings, but then they also have some optional ones. Check those out. Or if you're reading through your text and they keep citing a specific source, go find that source. That's really common in scientific articles for them to talk about like whatever source they're basing this stuff off of. So go find those sources and see if you can get some of that initial info from it. And then what's really important after you read is to contemplate. So when I was in abstract algebra, the professor that I had would tell us, all right, you need to do this reading because it'll help introduce these ideas and it's really good, but I want you to take your math book, find a stream next to a tree, read a section, close the book, and contemplate. Really absorb that material, right? So that isn't going to be possible all the time. We can't all go sit by a stream and contemplate mathematics. Quite frankly, most people don't want to. But it is important to be reflective on the material that you're reading, to really dive a little deeper, to ask yourself questions, to mull it over and try and get the most out of that material. This is great practice for yourself when you want to go further into this field, whatever field you're in, right? So let's say you want to become a researcher in social anthropology, right? As you go further in that education, you're going to be doing a lot of reading. So getting the practice in now on how to read critically and how to engage with text is really important for your later success. And this comes up at work too, right? There's so many things that I'm asked to do for my job where there isn't someone who can necessarily explain it all to me, or I need to develop something that's useful for people. And to do that, I dive into the literature and I find a lot of different sources. So really taking the time to learn this really critical skill of critical reading is important for bettering yourself and your work and everything that you do. And it's enjoyable. So we should work on it. Love critical reading. Okay, so we're going to shift gears here for a second. And we're going to go to our BB Learn page, which means I need to get to the actual page. So if we go check out our attendance and participation assignments, we can go to our week 3 assignments. And for our note-taking lecture, I already discussed our rewrite your notes activity. So there is one for practice critical reading. And if you go to it, you'll see use a reading from one of your current classes or the attached article and answer the following. And there are questions in here. So I couldn't attach the article to the actual quiz, which I didn't realize until I made the quiz. So that optional article is right here. So if you click on that, it's a 5-page article on music and memory. I tried to find something that wasn't like super course specific. Like I wanted something kind of broad. The last bit of it is a lot of references, so it's more like 4 pages. It's a pretty good one. I like it. So you can use that reading or one of your class ones. So I highly recommend if you have a reading to do for class, please use that just because it's a nice way to kind of like get that reading done and get this assignment done. So then if you start this quiz, it's 4 questions long. All of them are pretty simple. So what reading are you using? And please let me know the author and the title. So if you are using the music, memory, and emotion, like write that full title out and include the author. The second one is what is the main topic of the reading? And I want you to give me, like a couple sentences. So actually put some detail there. Tell me 3 key details of whatever reading it is that you have. And then if you're using a class reading, do you have questions that you could ask your instructor? Are there things that came up that you want to take to your instructor? So that is our attendance and participation assignment, our weekly presentations. So you'll see the slides and the lecture from our note-taking one, and then the critical reading lecture is here. As soon as this recording's done, I'll post the recording there as well. And then I want to dive into our weekly reflection for this week as well. So we're on week 3. And if we hit begin, so these questions do revolve around studying and note-taking. I do have one question in here that kind of alludes to next week's topic. So check that out as well. And then the other thing that I want to quickly talk about is I did post this resource from Vandal Health Ed, and it is really useful. They have a lot of great information. They're really trying to help students out more on the mental and stress side of this whole transition to online courses and being in social isolation and dealing with all of the really difficult things that come along with that. So I would check out this quick presentation to get some tips that might be helpful. If it doesn't work for you or you have any trouble accessing it, please let me know. I'm happy to get you another link to it or to try and problem solve how we can get you access to it. So that is all I have for y'all. This quality picture, which I hope shows up in the videos and I'm not just crazy and talking about something that's not there on your screen, is me as a child holding a raccoon named Sparky. And yeah, I just wanted to share that with you. have something happy. I hope y'all are doing okay. Please let me know if there's any way that I can help. Feel free to reach out to me at any time. I'm here for y'all, and I hope everybody is doing well. Have a great day. Bye-bye.